Welcome to the video presentation provided by Department of Medical Physiology, Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Indonesia. This is the first of two parts video that will discuss about immediate cardiovascular responses to aerobic exercise. My name is Dr. Nurul Paramita. These are the main points that will be discussed in this video series. In part 1, we emphasize on physical activity versus exercise, aerobic versus anaerobic exercise, and oxygen uptake. Let us first begin with understanding the difference between physical activity and exercise. According to the American College of Sports Medicine, physical activity can be defined as any bodily movement produced by contraction of skeletal muscles that requires energy expenditure above the basal level. This includes daily activities such as doing household chores, gardening, walking up the stairs, etc. On the other hand, exercise is defined as a subset of physical activities that is planned, structured, and repetitive. The aim of doing exercise is either to improve or to maintain one or more component of physical fitness. Based on energy acquirement while doing muscle work, we can divide exercise into two types, aerobic and anaerobic exercise. The American College of Sports Medicine defines aerobic activity or exercise as any activity that uses large muscle groups, can be maintained continuously, and is rhythmic in nature. As the name implies, muscle groups activated by this type of exercise rely on aerobic metabolism to extract energy in the form of adenosine triphosphate. This means that oxygen needs to be present in sufficient amount to promote and maintain aerobic metabolism to sustain certain level of exertion over a long period of time. On the other hand, anaerobic exercise has been defined by the ACSM as intense physical activity of very short duration, fueled by the energy sources within the contracting muscles and independent of the use of oxygen as an energy source. Without the use of oxygen, the cells revert to the formation of ATP via glycolysis process. This process produces significantly less ATP than aerobic exercise and leads to the buildup of lactic acid. Included in this type of exercise are the fast twitch muscles contractions, for examples when we are doing sprinting, high intensity interval training, powerlifting, etc. Exercise places an increased demand on the cardiovascular system in order to fulfill oxygen requirement of the working muscles, to carry nutrients, heat, and also metabolic waste products. To perform as efficiently as possible, the cardiovascular system undergoes changes, which are usually short-term response and would come back to the resting level as soon as the exercise ends. The immediate changes that are observed in the cardiovascular system is a coordinated response to meet the increased energy demand of physical work. These rapid alterations are known as the body's acute responses. Following a certain period of training, or as we call it trained condition, the cardiovascular system goes through various adaptive anatomical and physiological changes that is almost permanent, causing a slight difference in cardiovascular parameters compared to before training condition. These changes are known as adaptive changes. In this video presentation, we will only discuss the body's response to an acute bout of exercise with emphasis on aerobic exercise. Even before a person begins to exercise, the heart rate increases above the resting level. This is known as anticipatory response. It is now established that the first increase in heart rate comes from the central nervous system, known as central command. The central command modulates stress-related sympathetic outflow, including the sympathetic outflow related to exercise. Release of epinephrine and norepinephrine initiates several cardiovascular changes, including increased heart rate prior to exercise. In addition to the central command, the integrated cardiovascular response to exercise includes exercise pressure reflex that comes within the exercising muscle itself. Contraction stimulates stretch receptors and may activate chemoreceptors that sense metabolites. Stimulation of these receptors sends signals to the medullary cardiovascular center. This sensory input reinforces the central input to the cardiovascular control center and thus sustain the sympathetic outflow. The other one is baroreceptor reflex. During exercise, central command resets the sensitivity of the arterial baroreflex so that the heart slows only at a much higher arterial pressure. Aerobic exercise depends on how much oxygen can be delivered by the cardiovascular system and extracted by the working muscles. This is known as oxygen consumption or oxygen uptake. Under normal condition at sea level, each 100 ml of arterial blood carries 20 ml of oxygen, so that 1 liter of blood carries about 200 ml of oxygen. Since the resting condition cardiac output is about 5 liters per minute, potentially 1,000 ml of oxygen becomes available during 1 minute. The amount of oxygen consumed by the body at rest is only 250 ml per minute. Thus, 750 ml of oxygen returns unused to the heart. And this extra oxygen in the blood above the resting needs maintains what is called oxygen reserve, which is a margin of safety for immediate use if the needs arises. During heavy exercise, the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood increases from 1,000 ml per minute up to 4,000 ml per minute. The oxygen consumption also increases during heavy exercise, indicated by an increase in the oxygen difference between arterial and venous blood. Here we show the changes in oxygen uptake which occur when a person performs maximal intensity exercise from a resting condition. Notice that even during heavy intensity exercise, the blood oxygen content will not decline to zero. The determinants of oxygen consumption are summarized in the Fick equation as follows. Oxygen consumption equals cardiac output times oxygen difference between arterial and venous blood. Thus, there are two major factors that could limit maximum oxygen consumption. The first one is cardiac output and the second one is capacity of active muscles to extract oxygen. And this is the end of part 1. We will discuss about other immediate cardiovascular responses to aerobic exercise in the next video presentation by Dr. Dewi Irawati. Thank you very much.
This is the second of two parts video discussing about immediate cardiovascular responses to aerobic exercise. My name is Dr. Dewi Irawati. On the previous video, we have discussed about physical activity versus exercise, aerobic versus anaerobic exercise, and oxygen uptake. In this presentation, we will talk about immediate cardiovascular responses to exercise, involving changes in cardiac output, heart rate, stroke volume, blood pressure, and blood flow distribution. Cardiac output is a product of heart rate and stroke volume. During exercise, heart rate and stroke volume increases hence cardiac output will also increase. Increase in heart rate and stroke volume is caused by an increase in the sympathetic tone. At a certain point, an increase in heart rate will no longer be sustained by the increased stroke volume because of the reduced filling time of the ventricles. This point is known as the maximal heart rate, and at this point, maximal oxygen consumption is reached. Further increase in heart rate above the maximal heart rate will reduce cardiac output. The increase in cardiac output is needed to fulfill the oxygen demand of the working muscles. We will see redistribution of blood flow throughout the whole body. The percentage of cardiac output going to the skeletal muscles and heart will increase. The same thing is also about the percentage of cardiac output going to the skin as a way to eliminate the extra heat generated by exercising muscles. However, the percentage of cardiac output going to most other organs is reduced, while the magnitude of blood flow to the brain remains fairly unchanged. There is a linear correlation between maximal oxygen consumption and cardiac output. That is why VO2 max is considered to be one of the best indicators of cardiovascular fitness and has been shown to be a key determinant of endurance exercise performance. It has been demonstrated that the skeletal muscle's ability to utilize oxygen far exceeds the capacity of the cardiovascular system to deliver oxygen. Thus, cardiac output becomes the limiting step and explains 70 to 85% of the variance in VO2 max in different individuals. After the initial anticipatory response, heart rate increases in direct proportion to exercise intensity until a maximum heart rate is reached. At the beginning of exercise, heart rate increases rapidly due to the inhibition of parasympathetic tone. During light exercise, tachycardia is solely due to the reduction in parasympathetic tone. With increase of workload, heart rate increases due to further vagal withdrawal and sympathetic activation. If exercise intensity remains constant, heart rate will level off, known as the steady-state heart rate. At this point, demands of active tissue is adequately met by the cardiovascular system. Increase in heart rate is determined by the fitness level of the person. Even though the maximal heart rate that can be reached by two persons with the same age is equal, but for the same workload, a fit person will have a lower heart rate compared to an unfit person due to more efficient work of cardiovascular system. This will be explained in another lecture. Notice the different slope of heart rate increase with exercise intensity and the speed of heart rate recovery after exercise cessation in fit and unfit person. When a person continues to exercise for a prolonged time at a constant workload and steady-state heart rate has been achieved, a further increase in heart rate will occur. This is known as cardiac drift. The further increase in heart rate is caused by the increase in body temperature, which causes a shift of fluid from the blood vessels to the skin, reducing venous return. In order to maintain the same cardiac output, the heart rate is increased. At this stage, a person will feel like they are expending more energy than they actually are. This may create a mental block and inhibit one's performance. To prevent or minimize this effect, fluid replacement, maintenance of electrolyte balance, and acclimatization to the environment is important. Stroke volume is the amount of blood pumped by each ventricle during ventricle contraction. Two mechanisms are involved that affect the strength of cardiac contraction. The first one is Frank-Starling mechanism. The law states that the stroke volume of the heart increases in response to an increase in the volume of blood in the ventricles before contraction. The second one is the neurohormonal influence. Increased sympathetic activity to the heart will increase the strength of contraction. Stroke volume clearly differentiates people with high and low VO2 max. Individuals with low stroke volume will also have a low maximal oxygen consumption. Thus, difference in VO2 max closely resemble the difference in maximal stroke volume. Here is a summary of factors affecting cardiac output. Heart rate, which is influenced by the autonomic innervation, hormones, fitness level, and age. Stroke volume, which is influenced by heart size, fitness level, gender, contractility, duration of contraction, and diastolic volume and total peripheral resistance. The next cardiovascular parameter is the arterial blood pressure, which consists of systolic blood pressure and diastolic blood pressure. Systolic blood pressure is the pressure in the arteries following contraction of ventricles as blood is pumped out of the heart. It is increased when contractility of the heart or the stroke volume is increased. Diastolic blood pressure is the pressure in the arteries when the heart relaxes and ventricles will fill with blood. Diastolic blood pressure is determined by the resistance in the peripheral blood vessels. During aerobic exercise, systolic blood pressure increases in accordance to workload. However, diastolic blood pressure remains steady or slightly reduced. The increase in systolic blood pressure is caused by an increment in cardiac output, while peripheral resistance is maintained fairly stable by local factors. After a bout of sustained light to moderate intensity exercise, systolic blood pressure temporarily decreases below pre-exercise levels for up to 12 hours in normal and hypertensive subjects. Pooling of blood in the visceral organs and lower limbs during recovery reduces central blood volume. Hypotensive recovery response further supports exercise as an important non-pharmacologic hypertension therapy. As mentioned before, there is a redistribution of cardiac output towards different organs. Most of cardiac output is delivered to the exercising muscles. What causes the change in blood flow to various organs? Two mechanisms contribute to the shift in blood flow. First of all is the local control, brought about through myogenic hypothesis and metabolic hypothesis. According to myogenic hypothesis, when vascular smooth muscle cells in arterioles are stretched, mechanically gated channels in the muscle membrane open, causing depolarization of the membrane. Calcium entering the cell combines with calmodulin and activates myosin light chain kinase, resulting in contraction, thereby acting to resist the initial passive stretch. According to metabolic hypothesis, a decrease in tissue oxygen supply, local increase in temperature, carbon dioxide, acidity, adenosine, nitric oxide, magnesium, and potassium stimulates local vasodilation. The second factor is the neural and hormonal control. Most systemic arterioles are innervated by sympathetic neurons. Tonic discharge of norepinephrine from sympathetic neurons helps maintain myogenic tone of arterioles. Among the hormones with significant vasoactive properties are atrial natriuretic peptide and angiotensin II. During exercise, blood flow to the working muscles is mostly influenced by local control, while changes in other systems of the body is regulated by neural and hormonal control. With the onset of exercise, there is an immediate drop in blood volume. An increase in blood pressure during exercise causes an increase of hydrostatic pressure, which forces water out from the vascular compartment to the interstitial compartments. Secondly, buildup of metabolic waste product in active muscles causes an increase in intramuscular oncotic pressure, which attract fluid to the muscle. Thirdly, loss of fluid during sweating means more sodium loss from the intravascular space and increases osmolarity in the interstitial space. This attracts fluid from the intravascular space to the interstitial space. In summary, immediate cardiovascular changes that occur during aerobic exercise includes an increase in heart rate, stroke volume, cardiac output, mean arterial pressure, and systolic blood pressure. Diastolic blood pressure stayed the same while total peripheral resistance is decreased. These are some of the references that we use in preparing this presentation. Thank you for your attention, and we hope we will meet again in our next video presentation. Bye-bye.